and stand by, starting the recording and the broadcast on YouTube now. Here we go. All right, aloha and welcome everyone once again to another Paradigm Shift Circle. Today's topic is, what does it mean to awaken within the dream? Again, the Paradigm Shift Circles are a voice-only conscious conversation that we do Wednesdays and Fridays at 1 p.m. EDT through our Discord server. So hey, if you're listening to this for the first time and want to take part in future ones, be sure to connect to our Discord server to be able to join in there. And if you hear some meowing in the background, shout out to Shay the cat. She is helping produce today's circle. So she's just in her cage. I may lay her out at some point. We'll see. We'll figure it out. So, but anyways, just going to do a quick introduction and we'll just go over some house notes, and then from there we'll get right into the discussion. And yeah, super excited to be able to explore today's topic. So thank you everyone for joining today's Paradigm Shift Circle. Before we get started, here are a few guidelines and reminders. Paradigm Shift Circles are an intentional, sacred space created to host inspirational, conscious conversations to nurture our spirits and build community. Circles are sometimes recorded. This one is recorded and broadcasted on YouTube, and it will also be available on Spotify at Paradigm Shift Radio. At the end of the circle, we'll take a screenshot and to show the names of those in attendance, but you're welcome to opt out of that if you wish. We will let you know beforehand when the screenshot will be taken. Please respect the instructions of the facilitators of the circle. Please respect the intention of the space. Please respect your fellow members. You're welcome to simply listen in or to speak in the circle. To step on stage and speak in the circle, please use the hand raise button and wait to be brought on stage by a facilitator. Once on stage, please wait for the facilitator's prompt to speak. If you are already on stage and wish to speak next, please blink your microphone by clicking the mute and unmute button a few times and wait for the facilitator's prompt. Circles generally go up to the hour. We will conclude with gratitude at 5 minutes too. Please tell your friends and invite others who may be interested by sending them the link for the Discord. If you have not already, please feel free to check out my Patreon, where you can join as a member in the community and help support these circles and other events. Thank you so much for joining and contributing, and enjoy. And yeah, with that said, we'll just kind of do one last call for anybody else who wants to be able to join in at the start of the circle. Please feel free to raise your hand now and come up on stage, and we'll get things started. So real quick, for anybody who's in the circle, if you guys don't mind, maybe just jumping over to YouTube at some point and just making sure it sounds good there. And if you can just drop an 1111 in the chat, that would be appreciated. So okay, cool, we are ready to go. So today's circle, what does it mean to awaken within the dream? So again, this discussion is very much a continuation of some other discussions that we were doing prior to this. We had one the last one we did was, what is deja vu to you? And then the one before that was, what is intuition? And so this one, again, you know, it's like many of the circle discussions, it's meant to be very subjective. It's meant to serve as an opportunity for us to be able to reflect and just see what arises when we ask ourselves this question. And I think this is a question that, you know, if we were to ask ourselves this question maybe like 10 years ago, we'd probably have a different answer, because as we change, our relationship to the quote unquote dream changes as well. And of course, that's a big part of the question, is what is the dream? So I'm just going to practice sharing here. And again, for anybody else who would like to come up on stage, please feel free to raise your hand, join up on stage. And Jessica, you just let me know when you're ready to go and blink your mic and we'll pass over to you. In the meantime, I'll just talk for a couple minutes and then we'll pass over to Jessica and then anybody else after that. So what does it mean to awaken within the dream? When I think of this question, to me, just practicing exploring the metaphysical nature of it, again, you know, I think it's interesting, because to me, the process of awakening in the dream, to awaken within the dream, is the journey to lucidity. It's the journey to clarity. We often associate the dream as being somewhat of an illusion, meaning that there's something going on that we're not fully aware of. And the term dream can kind of be used in a few ways. You know, like we have the concept of how we use dreams, where it's like, oh, like what are your dreams? What are your aspirations? What are the things you want to accomplish? And then of course we also have dreams in terms of the concept of sleeping and the idea of going to another dimension and everything like that. And more so kind of leaning towards the latter of what I just mentioned, it definitely kind of does bring up this idea that, you know, oftentimes within dreams, despite how maybe wonderful the dream may be, or sometimes not so wonderful, there's often this circumstance, simply by the nature of dreams themselves, where we're not fully aware that we're in the dream. So when we awaken within the dream, there is this process of self-realization, this process of an aha, of a becoming aware, of making the unconscious conscious. And within this, you know, there can be very powerful revelations. Awakening within the dream can also also be, again, kind of like this process of like some people, they're just like, oh, you're living in your fantasy world, dude, like you're living in a dream, like wake up, snap out of it, snap out of the spell. And so to awaken within the dream is to acknowledge the fact that we are asleep within the dream to begin with. And that is actually the first part to awaken. In order to awaken, you have to acknowledge that you are already asleep. And so I'll just say this real quick and then I'll pass over to Jessica, because I love being able to kind of look at this from the Gnostic approach. And in the Gnostic approach, it really does hit home this idea that, many people, purely just by the default experience of being human, are living their life in an unconscious dreamlike state, meaning they are just kind of like living under preconditioned programming. They are living under someone else's directions. They aren't really developing a full autonomy and sovereignty, and they're just kind of like they're beings of habit, and they aren't really fully in this place where they've come to understand that there is more to this reality than meets the eye, and also their potential within it. So long story short, awakening within the dream, to me, from one perspective, is very much about being able to awaken into our potential as creators within the dream. Because when you think of dreams as in sleeping dreams, when you awaken within the dream, what happens? You become lucid within the dream, and then you begin to develop more of an active relation with your dream, and you switch from being a participant of the dream to being a more active co-creator of the dream. So let's continue to evolve as co-creators of this shared dream. Jessica, if you are ready, I will pass it over to you. And thank you again so much for joining. Go right ahead, Jessica.
And thank you, Brendan, and thank you for hosting, and wonderful intro there. So, thinking about this question brings up a lot of different thoughts for me too. And I was kind of like, do I look at this from an outside, almost not really objective perspective, but my first thought was like, yes, of course, like lucid dreaming and in the dream world, which I've had experience with over the course of my life. Dreams have been very profound. And I find that like honing in on that practice is something I'm, really interested in doing and working at. And I'm even trying different like herbs to kind of, and teas to kind of bring about more dream recall and lucid dreaming. And I had a really profound experience like a week ago with that, where I was in this dream and I recognized it. And there's this mantra going in the back of my head, I'm lucid dreaming, I'm lucid dreaming. And I was able to physically, alter the dream and be aware of like, how did I want to be perceived within this dream? How did I want everything to look? And that carries over, when I wake up the next day, it carries over as I go about my day-to-day things. Like, what influence do I have on my day-to-day life and the actions that I take here? So I love how that overlap occurs. And these sorts of spaces within Paradigm Shift and all the communities that have stemmed out of here have really also supported that growth within me and that mindset, and that, I'm constantly looking at the situations around me, and I felt so asleep, kind of wake up within the dream of my life for such a long time in so many ways. And I think that that's a common thing for people to feel and then to go through in multiple stages over their life, where you kind of do what you're brought up to do, and then you go through and you have like these moments of adolescence, or you finish school, or you kind of step out of the wing of your parents, and these all cause us to go deeper within ourselves. And so through that, we're forced to look at the world around us in a different way. And there's always that choice of, well, do we have any sort of subjective control? And control is maybe not the right word, but influence. I always like the word influence on our reality and what we pursue and the path forward we move on. And I've often felt, especially lately, almost like Harry Potter or like a wizard, where like I had been kind of aware that there was something more. As kids, we're always kind of aware that there's something more. We're so close to that realm. And then just kind of fell asleep, or there's this idea of core beliefs that often come with certain, I'm discovering certain shadow work, trauma that we deal with, that can become so connected to our core that we don't realize that we're holding on to these belief systems as we go through life, and they can almost keep us asleep, keep us in this realm. And so as we do work on ourselves and in shadow work, I suppose, we can start to understand that there is magic in the world. There are other wizards out there that understand these things, and I've really connected with those fairies, wizards, magicians, oracles, everyone through these sorts of spaces. And then the hard step comes when you kind of have to go back home from Hogwarts for the summer, and you're like, yeah, I'm here, and everything is kind of back to the way it was. So for me, maintaining lucidity is kind of my current challenge, and that's kind of where I'm at. So I love this topic. Thank you for sharing, Brendan.
Thank you again, Jessica, for joining in. And Kristen, if you're ready, we can pass it right over to you, and then I'll go after that. And again, anybody else in the audience, feel free to raise your hand to come up on stage if you feel called to share. And anybody else on TikTok or Instagram, click the link in my beacon to be able to join the discussion. Kristen, if you're ready, we'll pass it right over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brendan and Jessica. That your share was beautiful. I love the correlation between Hogwarts and life, and it really is like, when you begin awakening, it's almost like getting that letter from Hogwarts. You start seeing, it's like beginning to notice and being present and seeing the connections between things that may not be connected in any logical way, but beginning to see that you are more than just living. You have the ability to kind of create as you go, or to see the little bits of magic that spark in each moment. And I know for me, like when we speak of being awake within the dream, of course it also does bring forward that lucid dreaming aspect. And I know something for myself that I actually just recently started practicing. Like in the lucid dream space, you can kind of spark lucidity by paying attention to the clocks on the walls, or looking at your hands, trying to open drawers, being mindful, ignite that lucidity within you. And whenever you are awake, you have that same opportunity. And so I've been practicing, like just taking a moment to stop and looking at the ceiling and looking at the clock, or just noticing my hands, and finding in those moments, like asking myself, am I awake in this moment while I'm walking throughout my day? And it's almost like a mindset. You can allow yourself to kind of slip into an autoplay mode where you're just going through the motions, and you need to go to this and you need to do that, and this has to be done, and oh, I said I was going to do that, and oh, I've got to eat or clean. And so it's almost like you kind of go on autopilot. But whenever you become lucid and you become more aware and awake, it's being mindful in the moment and seeing, like, I'm choosing to move from this moment to the next, or I'm even just seeing how this moment flows into the next moment, and holding space for it. It's a certain energy of magic that really is quite gorgeous. And just to be aware too that, like, it is a spiral, just like life. Like you will have moments where you're very awake and aware, and it's like almost hypersensitivity, noticing everything, and then you might slip into a pattern of going back into that autoplay, and having to work back towards that muscle strength of being that aware. And so just knowing that it's a process, and it's okay, because every moment that you unfold and move through these stages of awakening, you're gaining so much wisdom, and you're getting tools, and you're learning more about yourself. And yeah, it's joyous and exciting and scary and thrilling all at the same time. So yeah, I'm excited for this topic today, and thank you for letting me share.
Thank you again, Kristen, and thank you again, Jessica. Beautiful ideas and concepts so far, and even just as we're talking about this, there's definitely some things that I want to be able to dive deeper into, and pun intended, as I'll explain in a second. And just before we do that, again, anybody else who is in the audience, please feel free to raise your hand at any time to be able to join into the conversation if you feel called to share. So again, we can ask the question, like, what is a dream, or what is the dream? And so the concept of a dream, it seems to be a state of being, a state of consciousness, and it definitely seems to be kind of like relative. The question is, like, are we ever not dreaming? If if anything, it's just kind of like awakening within the layer of the dream that we currently are in. And if this is the case, then, it's like you awaken within the dream, and then you're in another layer of the dream, or you're just in a different relationship to the dream. And then beyond that, there's another dream and another dream and another dream and another dream. And so the dream is almost kind of like the matrix. The dream is like the holographic reality of this container that houses the experience of our soul, body, and vessel. But the thing that's interesting here is even just, we're asking the question, well, what is a dream? But what is awake? Like what does awake even mean? And so it's interesting here, and I'll just talk for a little bit, and then I'll pass it to whoever wants to go next, because, you look at the etymology, and the word awake, like, is also, again, it contains the word wake, W-A-K-E. And so what is awake, right? Like, awake is, again, usually associated with the process of mourning after someone's death. It is something that you do when someone has died. There is a process that follows, and that is usually referred to as the wake, and that is where the family kind of gathers. And the term wake actually, in relation to death, actually means watch. It means vigil or guard. So to be vigilant, to be aware. And so it's interesting because when we think of the process of awake, the process of awake only happens as a result of the fact that something has, quote unquote, died. And again, this takes us even deeper, because it's just like, oh, well, does anything really die, or is it just a process of transformation? So when we think of the process of awakening within the dream, again, you can think of the relationship of being asleep in the dream as kind of like being under a spell, being asleep, so to speak. But when we go through the process of awakening, that is a process that happens after something has, quote unquote, died. And so what is dying is like the breaking of the illusion, the breaking of the spell. And this is kind of what we were talking about. You kind of move from one stage of your life into another, and suddenly you have like more responsibilities. And so within each and every single one of us, we have these opportunities throughout our life to be able to awaken numerous times, because there are going to be parts of ourselves that will die numerous times throughout our life. And so I think what's important is, what does it mean to awaken within the dream? What if our intention was to be able to consciously awaken to the best of our ability, and to become aware of the places within our life where we may be asleep, quote unquote. And a lot of times, again, this doesn't even have to be something like crazy metaphysical. I think a lot of times it's like even being asleep to our own unconscious behaviors, so to speak. Like there might be kind of like habits where the way we kind of like relate to other people, or things that we kind of do unconsciously and things like that. And within those moments, we have the opportunity to be able to just kind of like continue them, or someone might kind of like bring them to our awareness, and then we have the opportunity to be like, oh, whoa, like, thank you, I didn't realize that's how I was portraying myself, or that was like, it was literally something that was within myself that I was unconscious of. I was kind of doing it in a very sleep-like state. I was just doing it because it was a habit. It was something that was programmed. It's something that was kind of ingrained to me, so to speak. But then when you become awake in that process, you have the option to be able to say, do I want to carry that part with me forward, or do I want it to die? And die not in like this morbid way, but to be able to transform it, to be able to turn it into something else, to be able to turn it into soil and fuel, which will help cultivate a new part of who we are. So within the process of something dying, there is also something that can be born. So the process of awakening within the dream is both the process, it's the two sides of the coin. Something dies, but something is born. Something dies, and what dies is, again, kind of like the relationship to the unconscious, and what is born is the cultivation of the conscious, shining the light on the darkness. So we have this opportunity throughout our life many times to be able to kind of, again, become more like, to consciously evolve ourselves, to consciously refine ourselves, to be open to just kind of like seeing how we can grow and learn throughout this experience. And I think when you do it that way, you can start to look at life as being one continual process of awakening into the dream, which is really, again, us on this journey of self-realization and self-actualization as well, to be able to become the best version of ourselves, so that we can continue to serve others and to learn the soul lessons that we're here to learn. So yeah, that's one thing that I just would really want to be able to focus on, like just the word awake and how that relates to the process of death and dying. And yeah, I don't know, I thought that was pretty interesting. You guys let me know if that was kind of like something that you're like, oh wow, okay, I never really thought about it, because we have all these words. It's just like, what does awake actually mean? Jessica, if you want to go next, and then we can pass over to Chris, and go right ahead, Jessica, when you're ready.
Yeah, Brendan, thank you for that. I always love when you come in with like the word definitions and the history. Like I get like goosebumps thinking about all of that connection. And um gosh, yet so many thoughts came to me with that, and just the idea of the wake in general, and in particular kind of how this relates to what Kristen was talking about and being aware of like the small things within our dream and within our waking life. And then this idea of awake, where, part of that concept is that there's other people there, other conscious minds that are also observing in some regard. And I am very curious now after hearing you. I don't have a whole lot to speak on this, but just the idea of observation, both from within ourselves, but then also as we observe others who are going through their journeys, and then how, I suppose, how they observe us, but not necessarily in a, perception like judgmental way, but just understanding that that observation helps them, kind of come to terms with their reality. And it can also help reflect on us, the parts of us that we need to, or have the choice to, let go, transform, let die necessarily. I was just going through some really tough shadow work this yesterday, actually, cancer season, all full and emotional stuff, but understanding this like core belief that I've held on to myself, was actually in relation to this observation that I had on others, and what I perceived was put on me was a huge transformation for me. And so trying to let go of this idea that everything is like my responsibility because that was a certain perception, is really profound. And so trying to look at waking up within the dream and how observation with it, with others, and that collective consciousness, I think is a really interesting, aspect that I definitely want to explore more. But I don't know if that evokes any other thoughts either.
Thank you, Jessica. Kristen, we can pass it right over to you. I know you were blinking earlier, so if you're ready, go right ahead.
Oh yes. So the topic of death and dying in relation with awakening, it's truly a part of the process where whenever you do begin to become aware, awake, it's like if, like Jessica said, maybe you start to notice a pattern or a way of behavior, and you see this and you see where it comes from, or you just begin to become aware that this is something that, maybe you do want to change, or maybe you don't want to change, but you look into it. And then you decide, okay, moving forward, this is something I'd like to change and transform and evolve. And in order for anything to transform and evolve, it truly must be able to die first, to allow the parts of yourself that no longer fit the paradigm that you are shifting into. Because if you try to carry those old parts of yourself, or those old thought patterns or processes that are no longer, um, in that vibration or fitting those thought processes, it's going to make the transition a whole lot more difficult. And definitely holding space for that, being able to know that like it is a process whenever something within you needs to die and be released, so that something new can be reborn and step into that space. And Jessica, I love you mentioning perceptions. It's one of my favorite topics, about how interesting it is that we all live in this world together, but yet we all experience our own unique expressions and perceptions of reality. Even this moment that we are all sharing here together, it is a perception of your reality. And you see me in this space from how you've been able to perceive me. But there is so much more that is happening in my life, in my world, in my mind, than what anyone will ever be able to perceive. And I think that that's what makes us so unique and special, because it really is this beautiful experience that we can come together with such unique expressions and be able to find a common perception to vibe with while we have these amazing conversations, and then to go off into our own spaces and unfold and dive deeper and let it kind of move through us as we maybe change or alter our perceptions. And it's like this thought that everything in life is always unfolding, and it's always growing and moving. And stagnation, when it hits you, that's like the moment to realize, okay, it's time for something to die so I can move on and continue growing. And so Yeah, beautiful, beautiful topics. Thank
Thank
you
you
for
for
letting
letting
me
me
share.
share.
Thank you. Thank you again, Kristen and Jessica. And again, for anybody else who wants to be able to join and share, please feel free to raise your hand at any point, and I'll just practice just sharing some more, and we'll just kind of go from there. And yeah, again, like it's interesting because we can look at this, and I think it's important to perceive it through a lens of juxtaposition, where it's like, okay, like what does it mean to be awake, and what does it mean to be asleep? And so with the process of being awake, bringing it back to that concept of lucidity, and the process of lucidity is the process of being able to see things clearly. So as we continue to awaken within the dream, this is ultimately about the journey. To awaken within the dream is the journey of awakening consciousness, awakening awareness, because to be able to have lucidity or to be awake is to be able to see. And so in the process of being able to see is the process of being able to be aware. And so the journey within ourself as we continue to grow, and this is a part of the natural human experience, is to become more aware of who we are and to become more aware of the unconscious, to make the unconscious conscious. So there's parts within ourself that are still asleep, that we are awakening. We don't just like suddenly like awaken to some grand realization with the snap of a finger. There might be periods of these like holy moments, and that can be, again, oftentimes, like when we're talking about awake, it's a very relative. You can kind of awake to your habits and your personal journey, but then you can also kind of awaken into this realization of like, oh my goodness, this reality is an infinite fractal of unfolding sacred geometry and light, and I'm actually like a multidimensional being here within this perception of this illusion of like this linear experience. But time is actually non-linear, and I'm actually a soul that's existed in many incarnations and many planets, and this reality is like another version of the dream. So there's like layers to like kind of like how much you can kind of go through the process of awakening. And I think again, it's something that will naturally just kind of like happen through stages. But again, if we're looking at it through just being able to understand, we can kind of understand that awakening is something that almost it's a very personal thing, but it's also kind of something that relates to a spectrum. And so if we were to perceive, like, well, what does it mean when someone is quote unquote asleep? And even the process of being able to explore that, it's also important to be awake or aware of our own quote unquote judgments of people who are asleep, but just be able to kind of like see it from as, kind of a objective point of view as possible. Again, if we were to kind of like just be looking at it from a cliche point of view of someone who is quote unquote asleep, we kind of have a lot of these terms and even these like slangs where it's like, oh, they're just sheep, they're just drones, they're just NPCs, non-playable characters, and we have all these phrases and stuff like that. But again, like what is actually happening there? It's the idea that they are allowing their mind to be governed by something outside of themselves. And so to be asleep is to unconsciously, without one's full awareness, or sometimes consciously, maybe some people consciously choose to be asleep, because I mean, maybe that's a whole topic in itself, but unconsciously, it's kind of like this idea of understanding that we as humans, we are byproducts of our environment, and people are very impressional and programmed. And so people can become, like we're kind of seeing this within this journey of this awakening, where there's one side of humanity that is continuing to move further towards awakening, and with the process of awakening is also the realization of our interconnectedness with nature and unity, and again, just being able to understand and see kind of like the Buddha nature and everything. And this is what we came here to do in a lot of ways. Not all of us, in some ways, but again, like we literally came here to go through the process of remembering. So the process of remembering is very much akin to the process of awakening. But equally so, there are a bunch of people who are falling deeper and deeper asleep, quote unquote. And so in the process of being able to observe what's happening with people who are asleep, again, it's kind of like this idea that they haven't been given the environment that supports them developing the habits to be able to think for themselves, to be able to question the narratives, to question authority, to be able to get inquisitive. And so, being awake is something that literally requires upkeep. I'm sure some of us have kind of felt this at some times. We're like, oh man, like being awake, like being this aware, sometimes it can become exhausting. And that's where, at moments we just kind of need to be able to not like quote unquote go to sleep, but to give ourselves rest, and to just kind of like lessen our awareness and just kind of be like, yeah, you know what, I'm just gonna watch a cool movie today, I'm just gonna kind of relax, I'm just gonna keep things simple. Does that mean you're quote unquote asleep? But no, like your awareness, your awakeness is something that is, you can kind of like turn it like a dial. Even though, like, as much as you can turn it up, that awareness is something that is there all the time, but you don't have to constantly be in that state of awareness. It's kind of like even within dreams themselves. And again, I'm just talking here until anybody else wants to go next. So anybody who wants to raise their hand or blink their mic, just go ahead and blink their mic at any time. I'll pass it over to you. And Jessica, I'll pass it over to you in a second. Again, like even within dreams, like it would be exhausting to be lucid in a dream all the time. Understandably, some people are, some people, like, they're lucid in their dreams the majority of the time, and I can't speak to that. That's not my experience. But like sometimes it's like the soul literally needs to go through the process of rest, where we understand that awake and asleep are part of the same breath. So it's not necessarily this idea that, it's like, oh, one is good and one is bad. It's just different sides of the breath, and it's part of a bigger story where we literally have to be asleep in order to go through the journey of awakening. If we came into this incarnation fully aware, why would we even be here in the first place? Not to say there wouldn't be a reason, but I mean, again, that's kind of a curious thing to kind of ponder. But we come here to grow. So being asleep, quote unquote, is very much also the process of looking at it kind of like the dirt on the seed, the darkness, the shadow. So in the process of things being asleep, there's also the journey of awakening and pushing through and growing. Is there growth in the realm of sleep? Absolutely. That can be a time of like incubation and gestation and cultivation, and then the awakening process is kind of like the sprouting of the seed. And I'll just say this, and this will maybe segue into something that anybody else wants to say. We have to acknowledge that the awakening process is oftentimes, relatively speaking, a painful process. Not all the time, but it can be a very painful process. And it can be a painful process in the kind of like realizations of like, oh my goodness, like I can't believe how asleep I was. And it's this breaking out of a spell, and you kind of maybe have to admit that you saw things incorrectly, quote unquote, or you were quote unquote wrong, or you were quote unquote kind of like unconscious of your behaviors and things like that. So awakening can be a very non-comfortable experience, but within that discomfort, there again is also kind of like the growth that it opens up to us. So it's like, do you choose to awaken? Is awakening a choice? And how do you incorporate that into just like your relationship with the world? Jessica, I will pass it over to you, and then Kristen, and then anybody else, feel free to raise your hand, and we'll keep an eye on the time, and we'll go from there. So when you're ready, Jessica, go right ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. You kind of actually took the thoughts like right out of my head. So was really, kind of thinking about that idea of balance and just the exhaustion that, it does take in order to maintain a state of lucidity constantly, whether you're actually physically asleep or just trying to go about your day-to-day life. And kind of got me thinking about this idea of like a governing body of some sort, and there's that element of the ego, that we try to identify and realize that too can act as this kind of governing role within our lives, and it can help. It's a survival mechanism. I do feel like, there's aspects of the ego we need to go about and to function and to relate to people and just go about our day-to-day lives. And then at the same time, taking that step back and taking a break from that and realizing that there's more to you, there's more to us outside of that self. It can also be very profound, can be very healing, re-energizing, but at the same time, to maintain a state of being outside of the ego in and of itself is very exhausting. So finding that balance is very key. And you were talking just about the awakening process and how that can be very painful. And I've gone through that, multitudes of times in my life. And in particular, I'm really think about the times I've spent alone in nature, especially when I've gone like out overnight by myself in nature. And the amount of fear, it touches on this almost like instinctual primal level. Not only if you're really truly out alone, like, do you have the time and the space to connect with everything that's awakening around you, you know, the ants on the ground and how they go about their little societies, and the wind that travels through the trees, and the birds and which directions they fly. You know, it gives you this idea of the greater scheme of things, and just your perspective and your placement within that. But then, like, being out overnight alone can be a very terrifying experience, and it touches on these very primal fears. But going through that kind of experience, once you come back from that, is so empowering. It really has tapped me into what I am capable of, and how fear can just be this construct of the mind. So I really appreciate that thought, and remind myself too that yes, breaks are good. Taking care of myself is a very important thing. So thank you again for this discussion. I'll pass it over to Kristen if she wants to talk.
Thank you, Jessica. Kristen, go right ahead.
Oh my goodness, yes. The pain that you go through in the awakening process. I mean, if you think about the relation of it to dying, I mean, you know, part of you really does have to die, and that is a painful process. And I think the parts that make it more painful, at least in my experience, was kind of that phase of not wanting to let go, that phase of being like, does this part of me really have to die? And then kind of accepting that about yourself, like, yes, this is no longer serving me. This is in the highest good, you know, and seeing your own growth. But absolutely, I think that's one of the most beautiful, intricate parts of it, is to be able to see that, like, the pain that you go through brings you so much wisdom and gives you the opportunity to connect with others. I think something that brings my heart a lot of joy is when I see people that are kind of just awakening to different aspects of themselves, and they get so enthusiastic and excited, and they reach out to, so they're like, oh, this, all of these things people need to know, and I know I'm not the only one going through this, so I'm going to hold space for others that are going through this too. And the connections that you make because of that pain that drives you, that encourages and inspires you, to help be there for others, to be able to walk them through the process too. It's like knowing that although it is your process, you do not have to walk alone, that you can have others, kind of beside you, and even just holding space for you. I know for myself, sometimes it doesn't even have to be words. Just sitting in presence with someone who understands the process that I'm going through can be, you know, life changing in that moment. And so I think a lot of the process of awakening does involve pain, you know, but from pain we get growth, and the growth that you get when you walk through those steps and those phases gives you the tools necessary to move forward, and the inspiration you gain as well is just, it's awe-inspiring for me. I think that's one of my favorite things, is to watch people as they grow, and to see them become more inspired, and the connections that we make with one another. Because whenever you go through a process, and you experience something that's so unique and individual to you, and then you find someone else in the world that has experienced something that is along the same vein, that you can, you know, breathe and understand each other with, it forms this special connection, that even if that connection only lasts for the 5-10 minutes that you're having this conversation, it's like something inside of you changes, and you move forward, you know, new. And so I guess I just wanted to say, like, to anyone who's going through, you know, an awakening, because it is a steps, and there are stages, and, you know, you can awaken to new parts and new aspects of yourself and to your reality all the time. That, you know, just to be patient, and to understand that pain is part of the process, but so is the beauty that comes after the pain, the love that you gain for yourself too. And I think it's important to note that you learn so much about yourself when you go through these moments of extreme pain, and what better opportunity do you have to see this beautiful reflection of yourself in expression, whether it's, you know, immense sadness, and you're crying and you're expressing your emotions, and you realize in that moment, like, wow, this is me releasing what's inside, and how beautiful and incredible and, you know, raw it is. But then also to find that joy and that happiness, and to feel that energy too as it moves through you. So yeah, it's about soul growth, you know, and our souls are infinite and limitless. And so to be able to break them, to bend them, to grow and expand is exciting and motivating for me. So I just appreciate this conversation, super grateful. And yeah, it's a journey.
Indeed, indeed, it is quite the journey. So yes, we'll keep things going here. We're keeping an eye on the time. I'm really enjoying this discussion, and I know there's a few people who tuned in and even just tuning in a little bit late. So for anybody on YouTube or any of the other platforms, if you guys want to jump in to be able to practice sharing on this topic, please feel free. But even just feel free to leave your comments in the chat as we continue here for a few more minutes. We'll just go with the flow. But again, in the topic here, and appreciate again Pinox and Kristen and Jessica, everything you've said so far. Just really, I love this topic, and there's a reason why we chose it, because again, it's just one of the ones that we could talk about all day and night. And so one of the things that I did just want to be able to kind of like go back to is this idea of like, what is a dream? And so we use the term dream in a very kind of like ambiguous way. It means different things to different people, but it seems to be that a dream is very much like, again, it's a reality, but it's also understanding that a reality is also a perception. And so we have the ability to be able to kind of like create dreams within dreams. But it's interesting because what can actually happen here is that people can actually hijack people's consciousness through the creation of false dreams. This is very, very kind of like, this may sound like it's like, what is he talking about here? But it's like, oh, okay, let's like look what's happening in society right now. And you kind of have this idea without even getting too deep into all sorts of crazy stuff happening in the world right now, but looking at the basic concepts of people who kind of like live within the dream that has been constructed based on the mainstream narrative, on the government, on the corporations, pharmaceutical industries, etc., on their social peer pressure, on all of these things that they hear about and they read about and things like that. And I'm not to say it's all completely BS or anything like that, but we kind of have this idea that humans have this ability to almost like create a reality, and then other people, whether consciously or unconsciously, will opt into it. And so you can kind of see how there are some people right now within this reality based on one's perception. And again, I'm trying to be very gentle with how I explain this, where you'll see some people and it's just like, whoa, okay, like like they're, again, kind of going back to this idea, it's like, are they sleepwalking? Like, are they sleepwalking in a dream? Has someone created some sort of version of a dream that like is not necessarily in their best interest? And then when you look at it from this perspective, again, what you're also seeing is that there are other people who are starting to wake up within this dream. And I can speak from my own experience. Like a simple part of the dream was way back when I was younger. I was like, wait a second, like, I don't think the government always has my best interests in mind. Like, I don't think they're always, and this is like years and years and years ago. I was like, wait a second, things are pretty sus here. And then, because up until then, I was within the dream that the government were always the go-to good guys and things like that. And I was like, I started to questioning things. So again, it's interesting because you think about how it happens within our sleeping dreams, what Kristen was talking about earlier, and the process of awakening within the dream involves the process of cultivating a degree of awareness as a habit, where you start looking at little things, you start looking at the details, you start interacting with things, you start touching textures, you start reading things, you start looking behind corners, you start asking questions. And as you do this, you start to realize and be like, wait a second, like, this dream, quote unquote, isn't as solid as it appears to be. But prior to this moment, I thought it just was what it was. And so what's interesting is, again, within the process of awakening within a dream, we also have this idea of, some dreams, quote unquote, are also nightmares. And so when you think about what can happen within some dreams, and I'm sure Kristen could talk about this more from experience than I can, where in some dreams, if you're having like a nightmare dream, like an actual dream, a sleeping dream, and then in those dreams, like the dreams in themselves are actually the catalyst. The nightmare itself can be the catalyst to awaken you, where you can kind of like go through a cycle, and maybe it's even a recurring nightmare, and then eventually it gets to the point where you're just like, you're getting chased by a monster, and then you're like, no more, and you turn around and you're like flame on, and you like turn on your superpowers and you shoot a fireball at the monster, and it's like, and it explodes, and you're just like, I have the power. I have awoken within this dream. I have awoken to, again, this potential within myself. And then as you do that, it's very much kind of like a scene out of a movie, and then suddenly the structure of the dream kind of dissolves around you. So you can think of dreams as almost being something kind of like a simulated holographic perception based reality, which is honestly what I think this reality is too. It's a perception based reality, and so people exist in the realities based on how they perceive them. And so if they're perceiving them based on somebody else's narrative and story, then that's what's going to happen. But if you give them the opportunity to be able to start asking the questions, and they start looking at the dream a little bit differently, and then the structure of the dream suddenly becomes less consistent, less stable. And then in the process of awakening, again, it's a process of being able to lead us back to sovereignty. And this is the journey that we are on. There is a great awakening happening within this planet right now. Again, it is the awakening of consciousness. It is the awakening of awareness. It is moving, as David Lynch would say, if you experience the world with like a beach with a golf ball sized consciousness, then you will perceive it through a golf ball sized consciousness. If you cultivate a beach ball sized consciousness, and you'll perceive it with a beach ball sized consciousness. And so the consciousness, again, is the degree of awareness. What is the degree of awareness? Are you sticking within the small narrative of the dream, or are you looking outside of it? Are you asking questions? What else is there? Start getting curious. And as you start getting curious, you realize that there is definitely more to this story. So yeah, I think again what we're seeing right now is a continuation of the great yuga cycles. The yuga cycles are these waves where consciousness kind of dips and falls asleep, and then it awakens. And right now what's happening is we are experiencing this mass collective awakening on the planet, where more and more people are waking up each and every single day simply as a nature of their own soul, while at the same time more and more people are also falling asleep at the same time. So again, kind of moving this back into the context of this community, and we'll pass it around at least one more time for anybody else, and then we'll get close to wrapping it up, where here within the Paradigm Shift Central community, a big part of what we do as a team is we literally encourage people to be able to help assist others within their journey of awakening. And how do you do that? You don't just go up to them and just shake them and say like, you're asleep, wake up, wake up, wake up. Sometimes that works. You shouldn't. I'm not telling you to do that. But usually it's a process of being a mirror and inviting them to ask their questions and to show them what it looks like through your journey of awakening, and to kind of softly lead by example, and to allow their journey, their soul, to go through those steps on their own. You can't awaken someone you can't do it for them, but you can kind of like be a mirror and plant seeds and ask questions and allow and hold space for them to kind of do it as well. And in the process of doing this, there's a soul inside of us, a spark inside of us, a consciousness inside of us that it's within our nature to awaken. It's within the nature of the seed to grow through the dirt. Unfortunately, not all seeds will, but to the best of our ability, we can do what we can to be able to help water them and shine light, and to be able to help assist others in awakening. And again, and in the process of awakening, yeah, there will be some pain, but through the process, there is also the liberation of consciousness. And again, the awakening to more sovereignty, and awakening to more of the magic and the beauty, and again, awakening to what it means to become better dreamers within this dream. And when we become better dreamers, no longer are we just participants and byproducts of our environment, but we are interacting in a symbiotic way, where we are also co-creating it, and it becomes a reflection of how we choose to relate and perceive to it, opposed to it just imprinting its impressions on us. So how do you choose to navigate this reality? Are you just going to kind of like go with whatever's in front of you, or are you actively going to choose to create it? Are you going to intentionally become a better dreamer within this dream, and then co-collectively help create a better dream for others around you? So that's the question that I like to be able to invite others to reflect on. So let's check in, and Jessica, Kristen, if either of you want to go next, please feel free to blink your microphones, and we'll just put a couple more minutes on the clock, and then we'll get close to wrapping it up. Kristen, go ahead, and then Jessica, if you want to go after that.
Thank you, Brendan. I just wanted to speak on the lucidity within the dreams and the ability to kind of manipulate and change, and how that correlation has actually transferred over into my waking state as well. So as someone who has PTSD, I got in a loop of having these lucid dreams that were very nightmare, very, very hard to walk through. And I almost forgot that I had the ability to manipulate and change things, because in my waking life, I did not feel that ability to be able to control or engage in my own reality. And so within the dream, I became overwhelmed, and I was consistently experiencing the same, repeating horrible nightmare. And I started going to, therapy and EMDR and experiencing all this, awareness. And so I began to try to start to manipulate the dream just one step at a time. And it started by saying, to like realizing that, oh yeah, I can speak here. I have a voice, and I'm the one who's able to kind of hold the power in this moment, and being able to look at the nightmare and say, you hold no power over me. I am the one who gets to make the choices moving forward. And then seeing that kind of, like you said, Brendan, it almost like transforms within the dream. It's like everything kind of fades away, or even sometimes becomes almost digital, and then unfolds into a more organic form. And then from there, I know for myself, like I had this one particular dream where I was being chased and I got captured. And then I connected with the person that captured me, and I like worked out a deal to escape. And then they kind of followed me, and it was this whole thing. But then in the end of it, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to astral project up out of here and go fly to Mars. And sure enough, I projected up and started flying through my dreams. And it was it was an incredible moment to be able to just kind of see that, like, you do have that power to change. And then, this was a series of like many nights and working through this dream to be able to get to that place with it. But then I realized, like, oh, I had the power to kind of conquer that dream, and it no longer terrifies me whenever it comes forward, because I know I have the will to create from that. And so I began trying in my awakened state of like, when I'm experiencing something that is less than favorable, or maybe a living nightmare, stopping and looking in the moment and saying, okay, where can I manipulate this? What can I do to change things? What can I do to take action in a new direction to create a better experience for myself? And the growth that I've seen just from taking that mindset from the lucid dream to the waking dream, and being able to see how things unfold. Now, it doesn't unfold quite as quickly, and it's not as magical. I'll say it takes a lot more work to change things in the 3D than it does in the dream state, but it's still very empowering. And so I just encourage anyone who maybe has those nightmares or those night terrors to, if you can practice that lucidity, or you become aware to realize that you do have the power to change that, and that power lives and exists within you in your waking state as well. So I just wanted to touch on that. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Kristen. Very well said. And yeah, just as we get close to wrapping this up, again, a lot of the process of awakening within the dream is a process of empowerment, self-empowerment, collective empowerment, realizing how incredibly powerful we are simply through our nature. That's the idea. Like, it's not like we're just dreamers within the dream. We are the dream, awakening within the dream, so to speak. So yeah, and it's deep, man. Like, it's like we're learning it as we go. So Jessica, is there anything else you want to be able to add? And then we'll be wrapping it up after that. If there is anybody who wanted to be able to share real quick, we can put a couple extra minutes on the clock, and then we'll be done for today. So any last call on anybody who wants to raise their hand, go ahead. And Jessica, passing it over to you for anything else you want to add and finish with.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you again, as always. I honestly wasn't sure what I was going to talk about with this topic. I was like, what does this mean? And then just coming up here and practicing it, the words just come. And for me, the ability or the opportunities to awaken within the dream really are coming from shared spaces, from people attending my wakes, and I look forward to attending the wakes of others. I find this connection to be probably the most profound thing on my journey. And what I really love about this idea of awakening within the dream, in any sort of situation, because I've had the shadow trauma dreams and definitely the flying dreams to get me out of it. We all have different tools in our toolbox, and we go around and we meet people and we collect more tools and ways to practice awakening within our dreams in any situation. And sometimes some tools work really well for us and we use them a lot and they become really worn and they're just comfortable in our hands. And some of them we might try and realize it's not for us and we never use it again. But it can always be there and we can pass it on to someone else too. So thank you as always. I appreciate these spaces and I appreciate everyone who has held space for me.
Thank you again, Jessica. And yeah, I'll just add in some closing thoughts of my own, and then we'll wrap it up with some just some house notes for today. And yeah, you know, I think this is a very powerful question. As always, we invite people to be able to continue this discussion beyond this circle. So go ask some friends and family members, even if you want to just like post about it online and social media, continue these discussions in whatever way you choose. And again, it's not just a process of what does it mean to awaken within the dream, but how do we awaken within the dream? You know, like that's a whole nother aspect of the conversation that we can get into another time. And at the very simplest way, again, you know, like how we awaken within the dream, it begins through the process of cultivating awareness. And how do we cultivate awareness? Things such as meditation, things such as slowing down, things such as being able to look at things with more attention. So in the way that you would practice becoming lucid within a dream, it begins through the process of your waking reality. So it's a practice of being able to cultivate a curiosity and cultivate a conscious presence within any moment. You know, like we ebb and we flow. Like this literally happens, you know, throughout our day. It's a part of just like who we are, where we'll kind of move between conscious behavior and unconscious behavior. And it's okay if there is still aspects of your reality that is unconscious. If anything, I don't think there will ever not be. You know, like, are you beating your own heart right now? Like, probably not. That's like unconscious. Are you pumping your blood? Probably not. That's unconscious, right? But it's still a part of your being. So within the layers of who we are, there are aspects where we can continue to cultivate the conscious awareness. And then oftentimes the unconscious becomes the foundation for the conscious. If we were conscious of everything, that'd probably be too much, right? So thank goodness there's a lot of things that can happen in an unconscious way so that we can continue to shift and focus our attention elsewhere. So when we give ourselves the opportunity to be able to, again, do things like meditation, body scanning, turning inwards, developing habits, journaling, reflecting, retrospection, having conversations, spending time in nature, practicing being the observer of our thoughts, going out there, studying things, reading about others' journeys, watching things that inspire us, asking the big questions, all of these things will again be kind of stepping stones along our journey to awakening. And I think one of the most powerful things is understanding that each and every single one of us is again kind of like here to be able to serve as mirrors for each other's awakening process. As you awaken, I awaken. As I awaken, you awaken. And so when we surround ourselves with a community that is focused on awakening, you know, that's a very, very powerful thing. And I think it's also a very humbling thing. So allow yourself to be humbled through the process that there is still much to you that you are awakening to. And that's not a bad thing, but your willingness to be open to that is your willingness to be able to grow. So awakening is the process of death, but it is also the process of rebirth, and it is a process of growth, and it is a process of empowerment and sovereignty and self-actualization. Again, to be able to serve our own journey of who we're here to be, but thus in turn to be able to serve others, and again to become better dreamers within this shared dream, as I often say. So thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of today's Paradigm Shift Circle. This has been another absolutely heart-opening, mind-expanding discussion, and I'm so grateful for everybody being here as always. Just finishing it up with some house notes. We'll be back for more Paradigm Shift Circles. I may be changing the schedule for these. If you guys want to give me some feedback on if there's a better time that works for you, I'm open to the idea of maybe doing some of these circles later in the evening. That way so more people can kind of join in from different time zones. But for the time being, just stay tuned for updates and assume that it will be here again either next Wednesday and Friday at 1 p.m. or something else if we decide it soon enough. But either way, these will be taking place through the Discord. So if you're tuned into these in the future on YouTube or on Spotify, be sure to join into the Discord for this and other events within the community that you can take part in. And yeah, there's a lot of other stuff happening in the community that I'll just kind of keep posted about in the Discord Discord, and we'll just keep things short and sweet here. And again, thank you so much, each and every single one of you. Thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you guys want to join on the Patreon, you're welcome to do that. Help support the facilitation and the creation of these spaces. And again, feel free to subscribe on YouTube, Skull Babylon, and Spotify, Paradigm Shift Radio, and invite some friends for future circles. And feel free to let me know if you want to send any recommendations for topics that you would like to see on future circles. So we'll do a quick screenshot just to be able to finish it off. For anybody who wants to be able to opt out of the screenshot, please feel free to jump out of the chat now. This will just be to share to social media and the Discord. Taking the screenshot in 3 seconds. 3, 2. Perfect. And we'll just conclude it off with some gratitude and inviting everyone to share any gratitude into the Discord public channel after this as well. So Jessica, Kristen, thank you so much for joining. And if you would like to share any closing gratitude, please by all means go ahead, and then we will be done for today.
Just a quick thank you. I do have to step away, so thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I love you all.
Thank you again, Jessica. And Kristen, if there's anything else you want to add, feel free to do so, even though you've already said more than plenty. So Kristen, thank you as always. And yeah, with that said, we are ready to wrap it up. So thank you as always to all the shifters out there. Keep asking those questions, and yeah, keep awakening within the dream. And with that said, we will conclude today's broadcast. So for those of you still on stage, please feel free to gently unmute yourself and say a farewell, and until next time, and much love to all the people tuned in. So wave to the microphone. Bye everybody. We love you guys. We love you. Thank you for joining in. We love you guys. Bye. Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. Much love, and welcome to the future.